Our short presentation today is about this curious little passage in Old Testament book of Numbers, chapter 27. And it says, Then the daughters of Zelophehad came forward. Their names were Mala, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, and all the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, Our father died in the wilderness, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan because he had no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brothers. Moses brought their case before the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, The daughters of Zelophehad are right in what they're saying. You shall indeed let them possess an inheritance among their father's brothers and pass the inheritance of their father on to them. You shall also say to the Israelites, If a man dies and has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance on to his daughter. It shall be for the Israelites a statute and ordinance as the Lord commanded Moses. I don't know how it's with you, but in my part of the world, women don't usually stand before the elders except when they have been called up for some disturbance they cause. It suits for women to be quiet in the church. Even women in the Bible are veiled in silence in the church. It's easy to overlook Zelophehad's daughters in this obscure little book of Numbers, which is rarely read and even less often preached from. But the five women, Mahla, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, made it into the Bible by name, and not for being perfect, pious, quiet women, but for disturbing the traditions. Apparently, they were even young and unmarried then. Today, I want us to look at these five forgotten women who were left without their father at a time when God's promised land was divided among the families of Israel. As the father was dead, sons would inherit his portion, but not the daughters. Maybe it was just how things were back then, and nobody thought about them because they weren't hurting them much. But these women were truly affected. They realized that without speaking up, they would lose a home and the means for living. Maybe you've heard the circumstances in the ancient world, and things haven't changed much. A woman had to belong to some men for life and safety, and without a man, she was like no man's land. Anyone could trample on her, abuse her, even make her his own for as long as he suited him, but abandon her when she didn't. Prostitution, you see, is not a woman's choice, but a condition created by a man-centered society where women are first disowned for men's profit. Women normally play along too. They learn to believe that only men will save them, so they will sell themselves, or their parents do it for them, to the highest bidder and are disappointed by him. Sell themselves again and be abandoned again. Just think of the Samaritan woman. She had 5 men and still no husband. Note that selling women can be a legal and honorable part of culture even, and that it's not normally called that. It's disturbing how Christians easily think that this is biblical teaching, but it's not. The Bible assures us that in Christ there is no difference between the genders, as all are saved by Christ from the curse of sin. All are also saved and gifted by the Spirit, and all are called to the ministry by the same God, as God wishes. Therefore, these 5 young women from Numbers become a challenge to our own traditions, because much more is at stake here than a fight for women's rights. Zelophehad's daughters feel that the norms of society, the distribution of land to families, is unjust. Why can't they inherit what would have been their father's? They know that they will fall through the cracks and end up prostituting themselves without an inheritance, and this was not an option for them. The system was wrong, it needed challenging. So they decided to approach the authority in charge. I cannot but smile when I envision that picture. Out of the blue, these five girls march up to the supreme judge and his esteemed entourage. No invitation, no preparation, just a cause of life and death. Moses is still celebrated as the first and most prominent of the prophets in Israel. You don't just march up to the supreme judge with your individual sense of injustice, especially if you are a woman. The writer of the book of Numbers, I guess he was a man, which is interesting, presents us with the unusual case of the five women marching up to Moses because they thought that the tradition and the law is unjustly punishing the family. It's important to note Moses first here. He doesn't fuss about the unusual situation and does his thing. He asks the Lord. Moses is described as the humblest man on earth, and humble, godly leadership can accomplish much, even when the structures themselves are otherwise ungodly. We don't know what the priests, the leaders, and all the congregation thought of the women marching up, but contempt is more likely than sympathy. The women unsettled their authority and created disturbance in their order. But Moses is an example how a godly man in authority turns the whole structure to serve God's justice and saving mercy. God affirms the girls' cause. They have fought for their rights and they have won. This story says that biblical womanhood differs from our traditions of quiet, submissive women. God Himself affirms these girls' cause and method. They can march up, stand up for their rights, and they have a voice to speak for themselves precisely because the issue of women are more than women's rights. They are questions of life and death in a society. The alternative for the girls was to sell their bodies, become prostitute, that is, just live, just to stay alive. As such, they would have passed on a life of misery onto their children with even less chance to pull themselves up from the social gutter. The experience of gutter at any level in society is a problem for the whole society, and it is a problem for the church, I believe. Talking about justice in society is suspicious to evangelicals. We define the gospel as a spiritual reality. I think falsely we have boiled down the gospel to the word of hearing only. But Jesus says the Messiah is identified by word and deed. Go and tell John, he says, what you hear and what you see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. The good news always liberates, already here on earth. Justice, our Hebrew sisters tell us, is the central part of God's promise. But that word Christians translate as mercy. The right Christian teaching, therefore, must always be evaluated by the right practice it produces. The gospel is not just another philosophy of living. Our calling is about standing up to the structures of sin when we feel them, and as women, we do more often and more severely feel abuse, violence, and injustice of any kind. Therefore, these women are rightfully remembered by name among the community of faith, even today, and we should retell their story. Because when women stand up for righteousness, It's not just for their rights. It's for God's glory to shine in the gutters of a whole generation. Thank you for listening.